Hello and welcome to Two Mutables in a Pod. This podcast weaves our life experience with our love for astrology, alternative healing and Black culture. My name is Mimi.
And my name is Emily, and we are your hosts. And welcome to the Two Mutables in a Pod podcast. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Season 2, and a happy Sagittarius season. Today we are here back with another interesting discussion. And today's topic comes more so from a perspective of curiosity, but also personal insights, reflections, and conversations that I have had with Mimi in private, as we love to yap a lot behind the scenes. And, with us being an experience-based podcast, there is no better way for us to shape and frame the episodes that we release and air to the public than to reflect on our own personal experiences. And today's topic feels like a natural progression from trusting energetics as a language. So if you might not have listened to the bonus episode that we released in season 1, I would recommend pausing this and going ahead to listen to that before coming back to this. And for those of you who have already listened to us, then this is literally just an extension of that topic. And some of the things that Mimi developed from this framework in regards to the signals, the feelings, the signs, and also the messages that come from the body and spirit are very crucial as we look at this particular topic, which focuses on love bombing, the digital and the spiritual space, and some of the dangers around these unethical practices. Now, for me, this inspiration behind this topic kind of arose as I was reflecting on some of the connections and interactions that I had made in these spaces. And I realized that it all happened quite quickly, but as I broke down the initial follows, the likes that came flooding in, the engagement, be it through the DMs, be it through commenting under a particular post, and in today's discussion, whilst we might reference particular platforms, when we speak about the digital space, this could mean an array of platforms. This isn't just Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. This could apply to just the internet as a whole. And I think, when I was reflecting on how those feelings made me feel like, I almost belong here, or we're fostering a real genuine connection here. It really made me like the eureka moment and the penny dropped, because all of this happened quite quickly, but then it all ended very quickly too. Like the interactions, the engagement, everything just halted and stopped. And then it was in that precise moment when I was having that conversation with Mimi, did I realize that, hold on, I have actually been love bombed. I just never knew that I was love bombed. Like in the moment where the experience was happening, I wouldn't have termed it that. But upon reflecting months down the line, I realized that what had happened to me could be classified as that. And I think, the reason why we're having this conversation today is to really highlight some of the dangers that surround some of these platforms. And with social media being such an integral part of most of our lives, and most of us tend to use this to speak to friends, make connections, and so forth, I think it's important to look at the role that this platform or this space furthers these manipulative tactics, and particularly focusing on individuals who are cloaked as spiritualists in these spaces, already preying and, pouncing on the already vulnerable. So I just want to preface this conversation by stating that, some parts of, what we discuss today might be triggering for some, it might be sensitive for some. So if at any point this is the case, please do pause the recording. And in the description below, we have listed organizations that can help and assist you further. And as always, the intention of a podcast is to share awareness, to guide others through our experiences. So we are not in any shape or form here to fearmonger. We're not in that business. That's not our calling or ministry, but we're here to instead inform and educate. So I pray that this discussion today really empowers you to take back control over your own personal journey. If you've listened to some of our episodes before, I love a good definition, right? So I would love to begin this conversation by defining what love bombing is and what is exactly meant by this term. Typically, we hear this discussion or this word or this phrase being used in more so the romantic context. But today we're shifting the focus to how this term and how this tactic, should I say, could be employed by people in the digital and spiritual space. Spiritual space also including the healing space too. So me, I love a good Google, and I came across a really interesting article by a mental health writer and a solution-focused hypnotherapist. and her name is Anna Drusha. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. But she argues that love bombing typically occurs in the earlier stages of a connection, when the love bomber is trying to do all that they can to win over their target. And it's a cycle. A keynote to remember that this particular form of manipulation is a cycle. In this cycle, there's often intense affection and attention, which is used as a strategy to foster bonds and strong ties and connections. Now, where this becomes a danger, as we're defining this term, is that when you have this idealization because someone's pouring in so much energy, so much attraction, showing you so much love, and bearing in mind, most times these people are strangers. We don't necessarily know them. We're connecting over the digital space. So when there is this idealization that, oh, this person is recognizing me, this person is noticing me, there can be the instance where you place this person on a particular pedestal. They might not be a demigod to you, but you have a special place. Like if they message you, you might respond to them a bit quicker because they've reached out and they've shown you love. And typically these people find us. It's not that you are going to search for them, but they have located you in the wide web of the internet. Now, as this cycle goes along, in this love bombing cycle, there tends to be some sort of disconnect which can occur. And that could be very quickly, that could be with no communication at all, or little to very vague communication as to why they stopped engaging, why they stopped interacting with you. So I will leave that here for now. But I want to say, bear this definition in mind. Keep some of the things that we've spoken about, the cycle, the intense attraction, the intense affection in mind, as we now journey through some of the Q&As that me and Mimi are going to answer. So Mimi, I would love to start with this particular starting point and find out, in your own words, how you would define and describe love bombing.
I love that definition that you had shared, because I definitely obviously agree with it. But I think for me, it's that following out of nowhere, which you have described. And obviously, we're talking about this in the context of the digital space. So it's that following out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, you're receiving some sort of affirmation that gives you a sense of validation, importance, or collectivism. So there's the illusion that you are important, or that you're part of a similar mission to whoever has kind of found you and followed you. And very quickly, there's this overpouring of connection, love, adoration, and it happens so swiftly that you might not even feel it, know it, or see it. So it's this overpouring of love and affection and admiration, I would say, that lulls you into a false sense of security, of building a friendship, building a connection with whoever this person is. So it's that noticing, I think, about how things start and how the pace in how something can start in terms of the connection or interaction. But definitely as well, if there's that sense of importantness that's coming from that person, or that sense of collectivism, is how I would describe it.
As you mentioned, a lot of these times we don't know these individuals. We are in spaces where you can see a digital profile, but you don't necessarily know the physical person, right? And if somebody out of nowhere is overpouring, there then can become this imbalance of the scales. Because as you said, there's almost this hierarchy, like as we're going to go deeper into this, it's intentional. Everything is calculated. There is, I mean, yes, we have fostered a genuine connection online, and because we share similar values and beliefs. And I think that's also a alluring point, as you mentioned, a point in which many of us could potentially get trapped in these cycles, because it feels that, no, I found my sense, I found my people. These are people who are aligned with me. But there is that, I think, very important to emphasize the overpouring. It's almost this, why are you overcompensating so early on? And we don't think that way because, again, as genuine people, you're not assuming that people already have a strategy to engage with you.
No, not at all. And it's interesting that you mentioned about our relationship because our relationship did start online. And
Yes.
it popped into my mind before you said that. But actually, what was so different about our interaction was how organic it was and how the pace
Mm.
of it, like it had a totally different feeling in comparison to where I maybe have been love bombed and it's been very intense, very rapid. And that just was the complete opposite to our interaction, which is why we're here now.
And you said a very, like, listening to everything that you said, the pace,
Yeah.
the pace.
Mm.
That is also something to bear in mind. Remember, this is a cycle. Cycles, again, they're quite cyclic, but when something's happening too rapidly, and almost, and that's why I say, as we're going to expand later on, when you're in that process, you're not thinking that, oh, wait, this is a bit too fast. It just feels good. Like you feel like you have finally found your people. So I think that's something important to bear in mind. As you mentioned, we are focusing on the digital space. I would love to know if you are comfortable sharing from your own personal experience. What have some of the ways looked like that you have potentially been love bombed? Like in this digital and spiritual space, are there particular things, be it covert or overtly, that
Yeah.
you have experienced that have been like, okay, upon reflection, no, I've been love bombed here. Yes.
And I think it's important to just stress is upon reflection, and it's now in hindsight that I can fully identify these things. And I want to also just like stress to people who are listening, it isn't always easy to catch these things in the moment. So please don't like, please be gentle with yourself. Like if ever this does happen to you, because it's not the easiest thing to see initially. But I think off the jump is what you said about almost like a following out of nowhere from a profile who may have a larger following than you do. And they're obviously quite active and they're talking about seemingly collective and important topics. And all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden they follow you and you're like, but how did we get here? You may have mutuals with this person, may or may not, depending. But it's always for me, like one of the big kind of red flags is when you have the likes, you have the interactions, and
Mm-hmm.
then it phase up to then the sliding in the DMs. And what happens when what happens in the DMs is a quite crucial thing. What I've
Mm-hmm.
observed is, hey babe, oh hey my darling, hiya love, and very generic terms that can almost feel very personal. So a very like the use of endearment, the use of like lovey-dovey words, and then attaching it to something like, I've had this before, so I'm going to use this as an example. So someone said, oh, I had a dream about you. And I was like, okay. Oh, I love what you're doing. Um, Things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it reels you in because of the term of endearment. But
Yes.
then there's also something that is said that can kind of give you I want to know more, or I'm intrigued, or we share a common experience here.
Mm-hmm.
I've also had a lot, and I used to get this a lot. People ask me about my personal journey and pretend that they were curious. So, for example, I used to talk a lot about ancestral connection.
Yeah.
Oh, how do you connect to your ancestors? How do you know when they're around? And then it would kind of, again, it's like a hook and like trying to reel me into a conversation.
Yes.
Like,
The
okay,
strategy.
yes, strategy. What about you?
Do you know, before I go on to myself, I had to write these bullet points down because you were spitting the fire here. And firstly, you mentioned typically, now this is not us saying this is always the case, but typically these people, should we say, tend to have larger followings than you do. So automatically, and that's the psychology behind, being on these platforms, in these digital spaces, it makes you feel recognized. Like as a smaller platform, as a smaller account, having a bigger follow, somebody who has a bigger follow you, it's like, oh, they've noticed me. And then
Yeah.
you spoke about mutuals, because that's something that I noted, like I identified when I started to see a pattern of the particular types of people that were following me. They had mutuals, they all knew each other. So there was
Yeah.
a network. And when I did my dissertation a few years back, there's always these web of networks that exist. And this is also mirroring that type of form here. And I
Mm,
think one thing that you said, the terms of endearment that sound specific to you but are very much generic, is also a way that people are roped and lured in. But I found that I share a lot of, like, whether it's astro, whether it's music, whether it's film, I share my posts, and all of a sudden there was a follow. And I mean, don't get me wrong, when I see a follow, I'm not like pouncing out of my seat, but it was then the likes, the consistent likes, like a bunch of likes
yeah.
flooding in. And that obviously will alarm anybody. You're going to be like, oh, okay, what's this? I want to investigate. And then commenting. And I realized that, some of the, I want to say, some of the interactions at the time, I didn't clock the fact that there was mutuals in these circles. But
Mm,
I started to realize later on, and as Mimi said, please do not feel bad in any stage of your journey or of this particular experience that you haven't clocked these things, because we're only talking about this now in hindsight. At the time, baby, we did not know that this is what we were going through. But I felt almost comforted. I thought it was a good thing that there were mutuals, that they all knew each other. And that's also that false sense of security that arises. But I think for myself, it was the commenting, conversations in the DMs, right? I think showing an interest, what I found to be like quite alluring for me is that there was almost this interest that they were interested in what I was doing and what I was sharing. And as a small creator on a big platform, that feels nice. Like you're thinking, yes, finally, like people are recognizing what I'm doing, my gifts and my talents. And I thought that was a fostering of a genuine connection. Come to find out, obviously, all that is gold does not glitter. But I think that's how mine started. And then I would notice that we're going to go on to this part later, but there was just a lot of like forced promotion, a lot of sales, money driven related activity that was going on, which then made me think like, okay.
was that through the DMs or just like through their profiles? Would you say?
Their profile, not necessarily in the DMs, no, more so through their profile, but because of the ways that we had engaged, I feel like indirectly there felt like there was a pressure to also subscribe to these things. However, obviously, the reality of my situation was that I just couldn't commit to that financially. So I think, in some shape or form, my current circumstances saved me. However, because of the time spent communicating and the bonds that I'm thinking that we are fostering, there almost can be this false sense of like, I don't want to say loyalty, but you feel that,
Mm,
indebted to some extent. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a better,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you have had that interaction in the DM. So again, at the time, you probably thought that you were cultivating a relationship, and then they might post something or get on their stories, and then it kind of seems like they're atting you and they're directing you. Like, you need to be a part of my program. You need to come and invest in this. And they're not saying that, but the language, the way that it's phrased, it's like, oh, this was a bit too personal.
Connotations, and I think as we mentioned, like, as we're going to expand onto the parts of trusting energetics and what that really looks like in relation to this topic, I think no, these signs that we're seeing, no, they definitely are speaking at us. It's just at the time it was, I think we probably gave, well, I know when I would see certain story posts, for example, not necessarily comments in my DMs about these particular things, but more so the story posts, I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, you feel that you're part of the people being atted, as you mentioned. So yes, very interesting that you've also clocked that too. I mean, on to the next question, which is, I'm not laughing at the question, but I'm laughing at the Mimi's expression that I can see. So I'm interested to know, can other forms of manipulation, like breadcrumbing, and I'm just going to simply give a brief overview of what breadcrumbing is, and it is the act of inconsistent, non-committal communication to keep someone interested in you without intending to pursue something serious. So you're essentially giving somebody just enough, but
Mm,
not too much. so that there is that dependency that is created in this cycle. And some people refer to this as the Hansel and Gretel tale because they left breadcrumbs on their trail. But it keeps you, it could be just a like, they might speak to you, ghost, and then like your post again, and that automatically sends signals in your brain. It's like, oh, they're back up again. So can these other forms of manipulation coexist in these spaces? And do these psychological and emotional manipulation tactics also form part of the strategy employed by these people to lure and deceive the masses?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like, without a shadow of a doubt, I do think that people do use this as a strategy. And you mentioned strategy quite early on.
Yes.
The thing that I kind of question is how intentional this strategy is, or whether people are aware. I don't know. I'm a bit on the fence with that. But absolutely it can. And I think things like breadcrumbing is what I would like classify as that kind of hot and cold behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's all up in your grill, and then all of a sudden they're just vanished, and then they'll pop up again, and then they're
And
doing the most.
I'm so sorry to interject, right? But you mentioned as to the strategy, whether it's intentional. Did they generally start out on social media just like any of us would? And did they then eventually clock the game and say, okay, there's money to be made on this platform?
Yeah.
And then, secondly, going back to your point about breadcrumbing, I just want to emphasize that typically, again, we tend to hear these words and these terms being used in romantic situations. However, I would like to also reinforce that this can actually happen in any space. Obviously, breadcrumbing typically happens online, but that's not to say that it can't happen in the physical. I think a lot of these concepts, love bombing, breadcrumbing, and all the emotional manipulative tactics that exist really can happen in the digital space. And I know whilst a lot of these definitions are geared towards relationships, I think it's important to open your mind and be receptive to the fact that we're applying it to this specific situation. But I just wanted to say the point about the strategy, I think that it could be 50-50 split. Unless you're on those platforms, you don't really know how the platforms run, right? So maybe you didn't set out initially saying, you know what, I'm going to create an account and I'm going to go and have this like pyramid scheme kind of thing running on, but I'm going to lure people in this way. I think perhaps maybe they could have been victims themselves and decided, you know what, because it's happened to me, I want to run the game and strategy on someone else. I think it could be multiple factors that have come to play. But how I feel is that a lot of people perhaps realized what other people were doing and thought, let me jump on the bandwagon and let me make it too. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, some people have been taught this by their mentors, by their whoever has guided them through programs that they've also invested in. And whilst people like to say that that was more of an old school type of business coaching approach, I have 100%, and I will stand on this hill, seen people do it within spiritual coaching spaces as well. So these quote ethical things that people think they're doing isn't. And I do think, yes, it is a 50-50 split.
Mm-hmm.
People who are conscious and aware of it almost seem to double down on it quite intensely. And I know we might go on to this. The flip side is that we do see those people get results, unfortunately. We do see these people allegedly make the big bucks. Yeah, that's what it is. I do think,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, because you said like about other forms of manipulation and
Yeah.
control, and I don't know if this is controversial, but we talked about this in what episode was it, where we were talking about scaffolding of like
Yes,
intervention.
that's trusting energetics as a, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about the scaffolding approach in trusting the energetics, and I do see that as being part of how one can be manipulated. So, an example, and I will hold my hands up and say that I've done this, but not with the intention to manipulate people, where you offer something for free,
Mm-hmm.
you invite someone into a version of what you're doing for free in the hopes of almost like capturing them to then get them into the next offering that is paid or that is a premium. Now, I do see that as a way of manipulation and control, because it's like, and I've heard people say this, you just need to get people in the door. You just need to get
Sorry, I just it's so serious, but the express you just need to get it's very and coming from a sales retail background. This
Mm.
sounds like what you hear on the shop floor with your manager telling you that let's drive sales, let's drive targets.
It's no different. It's no different in person versus the digital space. Just
Yeah.
like it's no different between relationships versus these online pseudo relationships. It's the same tactics that are
Hmm.
deployed. So I've offered free readings before, but I've done it when I've had energetic capacity and where I've been like, "Do you know what? Like, I do want to show people that I am good with what I do." However, where I drew the line was I would never respond to free readings and post it on my stories. Whereas I see a lot of people do that. I would always DM people with a voice note and with their personal cards. And I would never talk about this is what came up on my stories. For me, it's like that's a line that I just was not willing to cross. Whereas I do see a lot of people do that, and it is a way of showcasing your skill set. But is it ethical, or are you just trying to manipulate the masses so that you can amass more money?
Do you know what? You've dropped so many gems here. And I like, as you're saying a point, like it's in my head and then it flies out because there's so many great points that you're stating. And the
Mm,
point about ethics, because it could be, again, you're seeing people in a particular field, in the spiritual healing field, which is a field that you're also a part of. Now, it could have been very easy for you to adopt the same tactics, like, cool, I'm offering free readings, let me post that on my story. But
mm,
ethics and like integrity would say, would this person actually want private, intimate parts of their life
mhm.
being blasted and showcased on a platform for people to screenshot? Because you
Mm,
don't know who's watching and you don't know. It's so easy to screenshot, and who's going to tell you to delete the screenshot on your phone?
it's true.
Nobody, right? And then there's the part that you mentioned about the strategy, because you just like I remember one of the ways that I engaged with a particular coach in this industry. And this is me being open. Like, you know how we said season 2 is like relieving or not being filtered? I'm sharing the real raw version of what happened. Like I got reeled in by the free offering of this connection. I forgot how it was worded, but I was at a time in my life where, I wanted things to come into fruition. And when I saw it, I was like, you know what? Okay, it's free. Like this person seems genuine. Why not?
Yeah.
Now, as you're saying, that just get them through the door strategy and approach, the scaffolding system, perhaps is something that, if you've invested, let's just say £500 into a course, you need to somehow, I'm assuming in these courses, they're going to say you're going to make returns back. This is an investment, but you could double and triple what you've made because you're going to get clients and do X, Y, and Z. Now, as you're saying, as a person who doesn't know how this system or strategy works, reason why I'm being intentional in using the word strategy, because it's like it's calculated. You don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to offer free readings. Like this is what you have been taught in your programs and courses. So or may have been, should I say, let me preface that, may have been taught. And I, obviously not knowing this system and how it runs, I generally entered into that space. And I think not quite long after that, a few days later, if I'm not mistaken, there was like, okay, join this portal for X amount. I think it was like 222, 333. And I'm not against people doing angel numbers. Do what you need to do, baby, because I think everyone is following a particular call from their spirit. But it can feel quite disingenuous when you're seeing just random numbers, particularly after when I want to say this in the most I'm framing this in the diplomatic way that I can. But when you're somebody who generally cares about helping people, and
Mm,
then you're on the receiving end of like, obviously you're getting the help, but then you're seeing that raw, like, okay, there's a price attached, which we're going to go on to a bit later. But one of
yeah.
the questions which I would love for us to reflect on when we get there is that does healing come at a cost? And if so, what is that cost? Because I think a lot of these strategies, these scaffolding systems, ultimately link back to financial investment. Like you can get X, Y, and Z, but only if you do X, Y, and Z. And that's why I said, like, you mentioning that some of these people are taught these things, it's very important and crucial to note that. And I appreciate the fact that you even have said, like, yes, I've offered free reading.
And you know what? I will say, on the flip side, that I have seen positive examples as
Yes.
well.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, today I received a message from like a group that I'm in, a WhatsApp group that came off of like the spiritual counseling training that I did years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And someone was very honest in saying, look, I'm starting my mediumship journey. I'd love to offer free readings with the gratuity of you maybe giving me feedback. And that was it. Plain simple. No need to kind of like showcase or publicize the depths or the details of what might
Mm-hmm.
come from the reading. It's if you feel called to give feedback, that would really help me.
Mm-hmm.
If not, I'm still here to give you a free reading. And I thought, you know what, that was really it. We'll go on to it, but the energy of that felt so pure, so pure.
You summed up what I was trying to say in a simpler and clearer way. It's perfectly normal for you to offer free things. If you're offering free things, we're not here to say that, oh my God, you're part of these schemes. And that's the part that, there's a space and you can feel when it's like, okay, yeah, this person is generally doing this because they're generally trying to better themselves. So they're trying to do X, Y, and Z and not siphon and not scheme or not deceive and scam. So thank you for answering that. I would like to focus onto the next part of these questions. And I would love to know, in your personal opinion, how far do you think the lines are blurred when it comes to love bombing and energy siphoning in these spaces? And also, what is energy siphoning?
So let's start with energy siphoning.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've had several conversations around this, and every time we speak about energy siphoning, like it trips me out because there's a naive part of me that wants to believe that this doesn't happen, but it does. But energy siphoning is effectively picking on or utilizing an external source of energy. So something that's beyond your own energetic boundary for your own gain. So it's taking from someone to better yourself. And from an energetic perspective, it looks so different. But the one example that I've kind of want to touch on is the use of magic, the use of spells without your knowing or consent to boost your own energetic profile or your social media profile. And this does happen, but it's literally just it's you're being robbed of what's yours without even knowing. And it's that classic thing of when we talk about these spiritual spaces of an energetic exchange, but it's an exchange that's without your consent or knowing. And sometimes that can be as simple as an interaction where your energy is being siphoned. It's so good to talk about. I don't know why it's so uncomfortable.
Well, I can see the discomfort in your face, and I even wanted to pry a bit more and ask, like, when you are speaking about this candle or spell magic, could you elaborate on what that looks like, perhaps, for some of us who might not know, because that is something different that I haven't heard before. So yes, if you're comfortable to share.
Yeah, so I've come across situations, people, circumstances where things like the use of glamour magic, for example. Now, please, I'm not a witch. I don't practice these types of things, but from what I know and understand, glamour magic is to make yourself look more appealing or alluring from an energetic perspective, where people almost cannot deny that they need to be in your presence. Therefore, they need to invest in your offering. Now, you're doing the magic on yourself, but it's having a direct implication or has ramifications for other people. Therefore, I would argue, is that ethical? No.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
Mm-hmm.
I've got it in my head, but I don't know what it's called. I don't know if this is a specific thing or maybe spirit's just giving me a message.
Mm-hmm.
But where people cloak themselves, you used the word cloak
Yeah.
earlier, but I'm seeing like a mirror, a body of water, and it's almost like they become dipped in some sort of illusion where you can see someone, but the reality is that's not who they are. So they put on
Mm.
a facade, they put on a mask, and that's what you see. But actually, when you kind of come closer in proximity to whatever space they're in, you're in with them, sorry, the reality is so different. So it's again the allure, the
Mhm.
drawing you in. That's more of like the magic that I have come across.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you ask a very valid question: is this ethical? Now, in
Mm,
terms of like self practice, as you mentioned, go ahead and do what you want to do, baby. That's
yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
And some people might argue, well, they're just simply trying to boost their business, but they're using their gifts and talents. But I think, as you've mentioned with energy siphoning, there's not necessarily consent or permission here. It's
Yeah.
almost the breaking of boundaries, spiritual boundaries too, because we are all guided and protected by particular guardians, ancestors, and spirits. And I think that when you're essentially going into another person's camp without even, notifying this person that, hey, you know what? And not that someone's going to come to you and say, hey, I want to use you and your energy to do X, Y, and Z. But without that counsel, and then you've got a particular person who is heavily protected, and then you're going into siphon, how dare you think that there's not going to be repercussions? Sorry. And I
Yeah.
think when I think about, magic spells, as you mentioned, it might not necessarily be the realm that we dabble into, but it's something that's very real and raw in the world that we exist in. And I think when people are doing energy work and, inciting, invoking, petitioning, I'm just seeing people's pictures, names, and then the candles that as I'm speaking, it's like that's highly unethical. But secondly, like above everything else, you don't know what you are. And I guess these people don't really care about, the ethics or the governance around the spiritual realm and
Yeah.
things about hierarchy and like permission, but you're calling upon things that you might not necessarily know how to handle. And I'm speaking about this more so in the we live in the Western world. So I'm speaking about this in the UK sense, but this could apply to different parts of the world. But you might be tampering with ancestors or guardians from
Yeah.
different parts of the world that you might not understand their language, their ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And how do you reverse the repercussions of your own actions when you don't understand the implications of what you've done?
It's true.
So I think the lines for me are very much blurred because, again, when you are love bombed, it's intense, it's rapid, it's, as we said, almost infatuation. You become so armored in this love and this feeling of like, whoa, this person is showering me attention and affection. And I think that's when they're also able to reel you in and
Yeah.
say, I want to siphon this energy. And I think a lot of the times I've typically heard people say, like, back in the day when I was living life on my own terms. And, people would talk about this in the church that people can see your star. But I didn't think much of it. I was like, what star? Like, do we go around with a star on our head? Like, I was very much literal in my thought process. And as I've, outgrown some of those ways and those, the outdated modes of thinking, I've realized that no, when people see you with a spiritual eye, they might see the gifts, the abilities. It doesn't necessarily have to be a star as such, but some of the light that you carry within you. And I think that also translates in the digital space. You don't necessarily have to be in person to notice and see these things. People can look at a picture of you and simply see what kind of person your soul and your spirit through the eyes and all of these other things. And from those connections, that's why I say sometimes it can be very calculated. They could come across they could come across your page. They could see the type of light that you carry that you might not even see within yourself, and instigating that conversation where you are being love bombed, getting you and reeling you in, luring you in, as Mimi said. And then people are able to subtract from you without you even knowing. And you're probably giving them the information because you're not seeing that behind that, as Mimi said, there's a disguise there, there's an illusion. Sometimes these people can cloak themselves. And a lot of times in the spiritual world, I'm getting the shivers as I'm saying this, people can really morph and transform themselves into things that we might not physically see with the physical eye. And unless you've cultivated a routine of, I want to say, protection work and protecting yourself and taking those signs, as we're going to speak about in Trusting the Energetics, very seriously, you could be putting yourself in harm's way. And that's why we say it is perfectly okay for people to practice whatever they want to practice if they're practicing it for themselves. But when you're doing that to incite, subtract, divide, and also take from people unknowingly, who are already most times in a vulnerable position seeking assistance anyway, that's where we now are saying, okay, right, is this right? Is this just? Is this ethical? Yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Oh, do you know what? My brain was reminding me of something, and I basically invested in a one-to-one at some point in my life. And looking back, I'm like, oh, was that my decision, or was I under the influence of something? Because this person openly does something. I can't remember what it's called, if it's got a name, whatever. But where they do a ritual of calling in clients. And this ritual is something that they publicize, but they kind of use, I think it's like some sort of like oracle deck or tarot deck, whatever it is, to pick up on the energy of that person. And then they number them, client number, whatever, something like that. And they put like a post-it note on the card. And it's something that's very public that they do. And I look back and I'm like, I wonder if I was one of those cards. Something pulled me to this person. And I remember sitting in the session, I was like, why the fuck did I invested this shit for? And I was like, this hasn't helped me at all.
I'm not gonna lie, when you're explaining and I'm picturing it like somebody pressing a post-it note on a card and like looking at someone's profile, these are things that you should not be doing without consent. Number one. And number two, again, with a business, I understand that if you're saying, you know what, whichever person, whatever entities that you are subscribing to, I am requesting, asking, petitioning for clients to come my way, that's different. When you're numbering things now and then you're putting faces to people and then you going into that class thinking, why am I even here in the first place? Seems to me that there was some tampering of your energy and your spirit to lure you in. And this is the part of luring people in where I speak about the energy siphoning. When spirits want to come, like they need an invitation, the spirit needs to be invited. And I think having that entry portal and that, that comms that is going on, it does open you up to different subsections of different things stealing, tampering, and also deceiving your own personal spirit. Because at that time, you perhaps thought, no, you know what, this is something that I need. And with your spirit being tampered with, because that's what's happened, you weren't able to see quite clearly. Only till you got into the session and the mist and the cloud and whatever it was that was used wore off. You was like, why the hell am I here?
Literally. And I really do want to like share that experience, and I'm glad that I did, because I also want to highlight that as much as we're sitting here from a place of like education and sharing our experience, it doesn't mean that we're sharing it from a perspective of we've never been affected by it and that we're speaking from a better than and knowing than. It's a no, baby, we've been through it. We've been there.
And that's one thing I love about us, that we aren't speaking about things that we don't go through, journey through, detour through, twist and turn through. We said quite early on in this conversation, none of us are above this. We have been subject to this. And this is why months down the line, literally months down the line, are we speaking about it. But when this was all happening, you would not hear this from us because we didn't have the insight, we didn't have the experience to help and guide you. So that is very important to preface. And thank you for sharing that, Mimi. I would love to go to the next question. And I know that you're going to have so much to say about this. But I would love to know why you think these individuals continue to thrive in these spaces. And why do so many of us fall for this, what I love to call modus operandi, which is essentially is this mode of operating? Why do so many of us fall for this?
I don't know. I was literally talking to my friend about this on the weekend.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't know why they continue to thrive. So we were talking about people who effectively go viral
Hmm.
in these spaces, in these digital spaces. And but when you tap into whatever their work is, you're like, something feels a bit off. And a part of me is like, okay, I think what they're sharing, there is an element of truth to it. And I think that truth sometimes can allow people to see the good, see the great, and then invest, which is fine. But then I think there's also the other side where they just really know how to communicate. They know how to communicate, they know how to express themselves, or they have, oh, this is something I see often or used to see often. They just know how to package and market themselves. They know, like, what good branding to use, have a good photographer, have really like eye capturing text or whatever. Like,
Hmm.
the beauty of their work just kind of draws you in. I don't think, and I want to be careful in saying that not everyone who is in these spaces falls under this umbrella or bracket, because there are some people still doing good out there, and it's
Yeah.
not to say that everyone who's in these digital spaces who's doing this work is quote bad, not at all. It's just, I guess, a collective kind of thing that we've witnessed over the past couple of years. I I struggle with why they continue to thrive. I really struggle to know or why. Um,
Hmm.
what do you think? Why they thrive?
And I like that you've also mentioned that not everybody, this isn't a blanket statement. We're not
No.
here to say everybody in those, I'm still in those spaces. Um, I communicate, and as we mentioned quite early on, I would never have met Mimi had I not been in those spaces. And there are some other great people that I've met too on there that had I not been on those spaces, I wouldn't have met. So this is not to say that everybody you interact with on those spaces are like that, but there are key signs that you might need to look out for in certain interactions that you have. And I think for me, the reason why these individuals continue to thrive in these spaces is because a lot of us turn to these spaces as a safe haven. It's a place for us to express ourselves, it's a place for us to also find community, a sense of belonging. There is almost this existing wounding that exists in quite a few of us. I'm not trying to say this is the case for everybody, but
Mm,
when we're on those spaces, yes, we're there to see what's going on in the world, but we're there to foster and form community. And I think when you're finally seen and recognized, which is, as you're saying, some of the messages that you get feel very tailored to you and your specific circumstances, sorry, it
mm,
could generally feel that, damn, I'm being recognized. And I think a lot of these people thrive off that. You mentioned um, the marketing which seems appealing, and I think they've mastered the art of what can draw somebody in, what will draw someone's attention, because again, that's what we're looking for, attention. It just takes one thing for someone to get captivated and drawn in. And I think it's particularly when you're looking for, it goes back to me, it always goes back to the part of looking for genuine connection and community. I think it will always be easy for these individuals on these spaces to do so, where you're already in a space where you're looking for help. One, you're looking for some sort of, togetherness, community, as another word, as I would put it. And three, they're doing things that are similar to what you're doing. Like,
mm.
especially if you're in those industries, if you're in those fields, you follow posts that are aligned to those things. I find that it could be
Yeah.
some of the reasons why they're able to thrive and why so many of us fall for this modus operandi. I think it goes back to what I've been explaining about prior wounding, some of the visibility things, being seen. I think for myself, I'm going to use myself as an example, being able to fight, because I'm on those platforms to express myself. Mercury quite heavy in my chart. I'm there to storytell, and being recognized, being seen for those very things is one of the reasons why I fell for those things too. You know,
Yeah.
seeing people who seem to appear allure. Their perception that they're here to help or assist you is another reason why I fell for that. And I think these are some of the reasons why people could potentially fall, but they're not like the whole list, exhaustive list. There could be other reasons, but I think some of what you mentioned and what I've said could form some of those reasons. Yes.
Yeah, just as you were talking with the kind of why do they continue to thrive,
Mm-hmm.
will say, and I am going to give credit to who I've seen thrive, I guess, and across all types of industries in the digital space, is
Yeah.
that these people actually have grafted. And I do think a lot of people have put in the years and the time to learn the patterns and the trends, and then aren't afraid to then repackage themselves, morph into a new type of helper, coach, whatever, see if that lands. If it doesn't, repackage themselves. There is this boldness and this ferocity that they can just shift, change, and morph because they've witnessed what works and what doesn't. So I will say it sounds a bit shady, but I am actually giving credit for them sticking to it, grafting, and witnessing the trends, even if they are shape shifted like no man's business.
Do you know what, my home girl and my good sis, you mentioned your points just literally flew me to a different galaxy because you've spoken about something that's more the practical side, that there is this ability for them to literally, you can wake up and they have a different title. The profile completely changed. Their offerings have completely changed. And that ability, because again, with social media, not necessarily stating that they are creating new accounts all the time, but these people have access to multiple accounts if they could have access to multiple accounts if they wanted to. And I guess that's the scary part about this digital space, that you can literally morph into different personality and personas very quickly. All it takes is a different username, a different email address, and boom, your Instagram account is set up. Boom, your TikTok, whatever profile you want, you can set up quite instantaneously. And I think that is also, as you were speaking, those were some of the things I was thinking about. The ability to graft 100%. Like, you've got to stick, like, that's dedication and commitment. You're sticking to a plan here, but also the ability to change with the times. Like, one day you could be a coach, next day you could be a channeler, the next day you could be a psychic medium. There are different, the possibilities are endless here.
It's true.
And I think because they have shown people they have grafted, as you've said, there is that thing where it's like, you know what? People actually are going to believe that I'm this thing. And they have that belief themselves. Like, when they're coming on these platforms and doing their videos, they're talking with conviction. They're not talking from a space of fear. Like, they're talking that they are that thing, and you're going to believe that they're that thing because you are, they're telling you that. So I think, yeah, that made me laugh what you said, but it also triggered that thought that the practical side of what this looks like is also the ability to have endless possibilities in this space.
Oh gosh, okay, I'm going to go there. I also think that those people, not all, who have grafted and have had the time and the space, may have a privilege behind them to be able to do that. So, for example, being partnered or having a spouse who has an income coming in, you might have the luxury to be able to survive off that one income whilst you get to figure it out, once you get to understand the trends and whatever. Or living in an environment where your outgoing is fairly minimal, you might have the luxury and the time to be able to analyze these trends and then to go forward in that way. So there is a privilege factor that I think sometimes we don't acknowledge, as well as social media does, argue it with yourselves, social media does highlight creators predominantly who are white. That's just a fact. Literally, please do not come to me with your arguments because I ain't listening. So you already can have some sort of footing or some sort of holding if you have an identity that is more pushed out because the algorithm supports you, or people perceive you as having some sort of value just based on that. So I do think that can contribute.
It's quite interesting because, as you were saying, that it's particularly about the race side of things. or how you're perceived because of your race. I thought about inventing Anna, and one of the reasons why she was able to succeed, she looked the part. And if you're saying Instagram and I guess platforms all across the board promote a particular demographic, I mean, it's easy for them to get into access and into certain networks. So definitely makes sense. I mean, I would love to also just expand on, following on from that question as to why many of them thrive and why we fall for these tactics. Why should more of us be concerned about the dangers of these unethical practices in these spaces?
I think there's so many things that we've spoken about. It's a literal violation of your own energy. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually a violation of your own boundaries, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that just creates all sorts of ethical concerns. But also I think it can minimize your ability to trust your own self, which I think is quite dangerous in
Mm-hmm.
terms of if you fall prey to these kind of things, because effectively you're either handing or has siphoned or taken your own power away, and then it just leads you further from trusting yourself. I think so. There's so many concerns. I
Mm-hmm.
think another concern is like this, like herd mentality, this mass following of, oh, we must trust this person without anyone like kind of questioning, why are we all doing this, or is this what feels right for me on an individual level, or does this fit within my cultural framework?
Sorry, guys, on my cultural framework, I think I'm lost for words because it is and particularly if you're following people who are not of the same cultural background as yourself, and they are doing things that your spirit, you might not be all within your own culture, but your spirit is saying you're getting that offish feeling, but you're still going with the flow. I think that is important to consider, that it's not just a one size fit all. There's different ways in which your spiritual needs need to be approached in accordance with what your spirit guardians and guides need for your specific life. And I
Yeah,
think, as you're saying, that framework, can it hold space for my needs? Does it
yeah,
cater to my individual spiritual needs?
it's
Very
true.
important thought. And I think, for myself, just following on from what you have said, I think why I am very passionate about this topic,
Mm,
outside of having certain experiences, is that most of us begin our journey seeking assistance.
yeah,
We are already dealing with an array of wounding, pain, traumas, and whatever you want to call and term these things. But we all are dealing with things beneath the surface. And I think being vulnerable and then being taken advantage of on top of that, that's enough to send somebody into the abyss. This could sometimes catapult people into just giving up with any sort of belief system as a whole, as a result of people out here who are doing, yeah, I want to say dubious things. I
yeah,
also believe that for me, the dangers, as you mentioned earlier on, in regards to the scaffolding, pricing, portals, packages, whatever you want to term these, fancy words for these pricing business models, what cost should healing come at? And I'm not trying to say people shouldn't get paid. I do believe people should get financial compensation for what they're doing because it's energy, time, gifts, and skills, and you've put in the work. But then we need to question as a society, how far gone or how far can people go, particularly in a space that is highly unregulated, as we've spoken about before? Because I have seen people charge, I'm going to speak on this one, not that I personally inquired about this, but I saw that, somebody was offering spiritual IVF for like, how much was it again? I think it was like 8K, crazy figures. Like there were like figures. And I'm just, was it 10,000? No, I need to go back to the screenshot. But I think it was something that was like, nah, man, the average everyday person cannot afford these crazy amounts. And you're just adding zeros to the end of packages that don't necessarily guarantee this individual the very thing that they're seeking assistance on. And for me, that's the issue, like the fluctuating prices, the unregulation, the fact that somebody can morph, as you've literally just said, into a different profile. We have physically seen someone's profile just disappear from what they were referred to as this psychic channeler. They've gone, they've disappeared. And I worry about the people who have entered into some form of dependency cycle, because
yeah,
as I'm saying, like, yes, I get readings. Mimi gets readings, but to some extent, by and large, there can be some form of dependency that's created in these environments. And then all of a sudden, the person who you're relying on for spiritual guidance and assistance as a spiritual coach, spiritual healer, spiritual medium, whatever you want to term it as, has dissipated into the thin air, and their accounts can no longer be reached. That can send you into a mental health crisis. And I think these things really need a lot of us to sit back and say, you know what, man, enough is enough. Like, fine, the government might not have specific regulations in regards to these particular services that are provided. And I think us having these conversations that we have, I know that's really made me think about, like, you know what? Before I invest my time, energy, and financial funds into a particular thing, let me go back to this particular framework, which we're going to expand onto in the next question. They offer you and promise you the world, I want to say. And you might say that this is an over exaggerated statement, but for many people who are in a state of desperation, in a state where they're seeking assistance, like when I've gone through things in my life where it's not making sense, I need somebody of a higher spiritual hierarchy and level to assist me. I'm chaotic. And if you're in that space seeking assistance, you're not going to double question the price that someone's giving you. If somebody said, okay, cool, I need to help you to remove these dark clouds and energy things that are over you, it's £800. If you're in a state of despair, you might just pay that £800. And there's no guarantee that that dark cloud is going to be removed from your life. But then through that cycle, through the unregulated prices, through adding the extra zeros, you have now entered into some sort of financial agreement that you might not even be in the space to actually even fund. You might have had to go and borrow from people, borrow from banks, take loans. And when the clouds and the mist and the everything dissipate, you're back to reality and you're back to square one, but even worse off. And those are my concerns for the people who are genuinely seeking assistance and help. And a lot of us are trying to figure out who we are in the world, where our origins start from, where we come from, how to find our spiritual guide, how to find that assistance in the ethers, in the spiritual realm. And I think taking advantage of these types of people, not to say that taking advantage of people who fall outside of this category is good anyway, but more so my heart goes out for this kind of group of people, because it's like, damn, it would have taken you a lot anyway to get to this state. To even want to seek help and then being taken advantage of. Sorry guys, this is my, like, that's the part where I'm passionate about. And I feel a lot of pain when it is in relation to these groups, because it's like, most times than not, people would have had to go through churches, had to go through, religious abuses, and have their faith be dismantled on every playing field that you can think of. And then to have to face this again. Yeah. So, no, go ahead.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was literally just thinking, like, one of the big dangers for me, working in mental health for as long as I have, is the big bold claims that I see people making online in terms of like people who have these platforms, and then people potentially entering into their space, but then people, as in the professionals, quote, acting outside of the realms of their, like, going beyond the capacity of what they should be doing. Being able to identify that or not doing that, therefore practicing unethically. And I struggle with that, because if you have someone who is presenting with spiritual psychosis, for example, as a spiritual practitioner, are you going to identify that as spiritual psychosis, or are you going to identify that as a mental health crisis? Like, where's the skill? Where's the skills to be able to do that assessment? Are you going to say, oh, I can remove it for you, rather than, okay, we need to get you to A&E, we need to get you triaged by a psychiatric nurse? Like, where are the boundaries here? And I struggle with that in terms of the lack of regulation, which you know about, that I struggle with. But I think it's dangerous for the people entering into that space, but also for the person who is actually facilitating that session as well. So as much as people don't want to admit it, there are dangers both ways. And we need a lot more care, and a lot more of, actually, this isn't the right thing for me. You keep your money and invest in a therapist, invest in a psychiatrist. But I don't think that that's happening. I feel like the ching, 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 ching is happening, and they're just collecting the dollars, collecting the cash.
And let me just also say that sometimes maybe people generally have these spiritual gifts. We are not denying that. But the
Yeah.
use of how they're going about these gifts is what is being brought into disrepute and what we're questioning here. But let's just say that I am, X sort of spiritual, whatever title you want to give. And as you mentioned, I have a client who's come to me, but I can see that no, all is not well here, and something deeper than just the spiritual that I'm trying to sell
Yeah.
there needs to be some sort of signposting. There needs to be some sort of measures, safeguarding measures that are in place, because I'm not equipped with the skills, the knowledge, and the insight to deal with this particular case. And in a lot of times, no, as you mentioned, a lot of these people will most likely never turn you away with your money. And I think it's going to take unfortunate circumstance where regulations upheld by the government are going to be enforced, and people are then going to actually start to think that, okay, you know what, because right now, aside from, I think there's something that says, um if it's like tarot or like oracle cards, they can't predict things about, I think there's certain, health. There's a few like suggestive guidelines as to what they can't and can do, but it's all grey area essentially. And I think until the government recognizes that this is actually a very real industry, very ever present in the digital space, but also the physical space, and until those measures are brought by policy changes, because I think it's only till people understand that there's actually policy, there's actually laws here. I'm not trying to say that takes away all of the accountability that these people also need to own up on, but I think policy and laws really help to keep things under check. I think, in my personal opinion, I know we're definitely going to expand on this, but I think we probably did touch base on this in the bonus episode in season one. But what I would love to know is why many of us, or why do some of us, should I say, struggle with trusting energetics as a language and a safeguarding tool in these situations? And perhaps you could give us a brief recap in regards to what trusting energetics is, as this was a framework, a feeling, and also a message that was delivered to you at a time in your life where you were navigating through a particular season.
Yeah, I mean, trusting energetics as a language was very much channeled through me, but Emily and I, very much created this together and built on it together. So as an overview, trusting energetics for me was like, it's a fundamental way of understanding and knowing your own energy and understanding the ways in which you move through the world and how you receive messages, signals, cues, whatever. So it's understanding how energy can flow through our bodily system. And when I say bodily system, I also mean like all the auric fields around us, the energetic fields around us, because we're not just our physical body, but it's understanding how we can then understand and then transmute that energy if needed. So it's literally like, imagine your whole body is a kidney that filtrates what it needs, takes what it needs, and then discards what it doesn't. But that's our whole system. So I believe that trusting energetics as a language is a way for us to access our wisest part, our wisest, most protective part of ourselves, I'll say. And I feel like a lot of us don't really have an understanding of that because we are so fragmented and disconnected to ourselves and to our bodies. And we live in a society that greatly encourages disconnection, no matter what people like to say is shifting and like how ways we're moving in new different ways. I feel like we are just encouraged to be so fast paced, to work, to not really have time for us or to connect to things that feel important. And if you don't have that very basic layer of understanding who you are and your connection to self, how then can you then trust or even receive the messages that are trying to come through to you? Because I believe messages are always trying to come through, whether you think you're intuitive, psychic or not, doesn't matter. We all have some sort of a mechanism of information coming through to us. Otherwise, how would we, for the most part, understand when we're hungry? How would we understand when we're in pain? That's a messenger. So yeah, just as like a brief. So trusting energetics really relies on the desire of something, the want of something, and then the need of something. Is it a desire? Is it a want, or is it a need? And at some point, Emily mentioned about the feeling of chaos when entering into a space. And just being able to identify that alone is such crucial information as to whether you can trust a situation or not, or whether you should proceed with something or not.
Thank you for that breakdown and overview. I think it's lovely to have a refresher of such an important framework. And, we're not saying that you need to carry this in your holy Bible wherever you go, but these are.
I think you do. Take it.
But I think that this beautiful framework, which was developed in a time of life, which again was quite very much in the energetics. Like we listened to the body, we listened to what was coming up, we actually followed the impulse of the spirit. And I think, in that and arising from that topic, which was recorded in season 1, the need, desire, and the want. I can't emphasize this enough. I think that in whichever way you look at it, this filtration system really helps you. And I say this because I've tested this out myself. I tested it out myself not
Yeah.
too long after the recording, sometime in, was it? Yeah, November, October that I tested it out. And I think that having that when you're in these spaces, be it the digital space, be it the spiritual space, taking that time to listen to those signals. As Mimi said, your body's forever trying to communicate to you. It's just that we've lived in a world and a society which really forces us to be on the go 24/7. And perhaps if you have particular placements in your chart that will activate that energy to be super speedy and everything, you might not necessarily sit and pause. And you might struggle with that. Sometimes I struggle with just being still. But I think it really helps to actually frame certain purchases, certain, connections, certain services that you might seek to go out and purchase, and ask yourself, what is the desire behind this? Is this a need or is this a want? Is this something that I will perish without? Or is this something that can wait whilst I listen to the energy, the symptoms, the signs, the signals, and the feelings that arise from my body? Mini mentioned the chaos that can arise. If you're in a particular connection, conversation, let's just say visualizing the digital space, and you're starting to feel quite, on edge, but before this conversation, you were fine. You should take that as a signal that your body is trying to communicate the energetics of that particular conversation that you're having. And perhaps you should caution how you proceed if somebody is trying to, upsell to you, because essentially we spoke about the process of upselling. You might be in a conversation in the DMs where someone's saying, I can help you, but if you pay this price to do X, Y, and Z, your body and your spirit system, as I sometimes like to call this, should signal to you, does this feel right? Does this feel settled? Does this feel aligned for me? Or is this something that, my body's trying to communicate, hello, alarm bells here, this is not for you. And I think differentiating between the need and the want really helps to, I think it helps you pause and not act in the impulse with something that is new and foreign to you. We're not saying don't go out and adventure life and experience life and follow your impulse. Yes, by all means, do that with, reasonable caution when you're doing other things. But when you're seeking to get spiritual assistance, healing, guidance services, I think it's important for you to sit back and pause and reflect. I think it's important between the whole framework and the filtration system to have a pausing moment where you pause, step away from the interaction, step away from the service, step away from what's being offered to you, and actually sit back with your feelings and ask your spirit, is this something that I need or is this something that I want?
Yeah.
Clarifying that. Because I think a need is something that you can't live without. A need is like, we all need to have a safe place to live. We all need shelter. We all need water to keep our bodies hydrated. But I want a palace is different from I need a home to keep myself safe from water and all kinds of weathers that are out there in the world. But it's important for us to understand what feels natural and what isn't. I think it's also important for us to literally listen to how these feelings make us feel. Do we feel anxious? Do we feel on edge? Are our hearts racing? Are we able to sit down and actually think that, you know what, this is something that is for me? Or is this something that I should actually speak to somebody else about and ask them for their opinion? Because sometimes, having had similar experiences where I've shared certain things with Mimi, and I've been like, you know what, this isn't actually how I'm feeling about a particular thing. This is a projection of somebody else's feelings. Sometimes it's important to not stay silent. We're not saying take a microphone, go out onto your story and start recording your personal experience. No, if that's what your spirit is saying for you to do, by all means, go ahead and do that. However, sometimes when you communicate and you don't stay in silence, because I think some of these experiences really thrive in silence. Had we not had these conversations, we wouldn't be here today sharing the wisdom and the experiences that we've had. So sometimes seek your trusted counsel. You do
Yeah.
not have to journey through all of this alone. We're not
Yeah.
saying publicize or announce things on particular platforms that you're not ready to share in your own ways, but with the people that you have as a network and that you trust within your own intimate circles, speak about these things, have these checks and balances, because oftentimes they're not. These people who form your trusted counsel will tell you, like, okay, this is something that you actually need, or nah, man, this isn't something you need. And sometimes you just have to go through the experience. And I'm going to say that as people, you know, I think me and Mimi are quite similar. Like sometimes we just have to experience what we need to experience. So even though we are saying these things, we're not here to like shelter you from having real life experiences. If
No.
you have to go and experience that, that is your story. You have to experience that. But we would love for you to bear these things in mind as you know, navigate these digital and online spaces and spiritual spaces and who you interact with in these spaces.
For sure. Oh, so many notes like off of the
Yeah.
back of that. Like, because one of the beautiful things I think since we recorded Trusting the Energetics is how much that informs the way that you and I communicate with one another. Like,
Mm,
if I'm having a wobble about anything, Emily will always bring me back to the trusting and of the energetics, and not, she won't say go and read that PDF, like do this, do that. No, she will weave it into a conversation in such a gentle way that I'm like, hang on, oh yeah, I do need to just check in with myself about this. And
mm,
it's so affirming that we can do that with one another. But I think even before you get to that step, I think the challenge can be like we're just not all wired or have had the space to give ourselves the permission to even identify our own emotions. And I do have this massive thing, like irritation, I guess, within me as a person of how emotionally illiterate we are as a society, and how starved of emotional language we are as a society. Yes, there is improvements. Yes, there's pockets of people who are absolutely there and doing the work. That's not to take away from that. But I think if you're finding trusting energetics as a tool or a framework challenging, that's your indication that maybe going to spiritual spaces isn't necessarily the right thing for you to start with. Maybe we need to be cultivating the mental and emotional first, work on that so that we can build that emotional literacy, then start to come into, can I identify that desire, that want, that need, before you then move into spiritual healing, spiritual readings, or whatever. I do also want to say, like, I've had many examples this year where me as the spiritual practitioner have had people saying, oh, I'll come back to you next month then, or can I come back to you next month? And I'm like, for what? Why are you coming back to me next month for a reading? We don't need to do that. And I need practitioners to start saying no more, because we do not need, again, it's energy siphoning. We don't need to keep people in these entrapments and entanglements. Otherwise, what are we doing? Like you said it like really well about kind of like the time and the space. Like, you do need time to process, time to acclimate to the information, but then also time to be in presence with what it is. And also, you need to live your fucking life. Like, you need to let life do its thing. Like, we can't just be bouncing from reading to reading. Otherwise, where is your sense of you?
wow. You just can't be bouncing from reading to, and as take this from somebody who has bounced from reading to reading. If you don't live life, I realize all of these prophecies, the things that people are seeing, the foretelling, how are they going to come into fruition if you ain't living the damn life? And I realize I have to say to myself, damn me, like the things that you're getting in these readings, how are they going to come through if you're not living life, if you're not doing life? And it's true, live the damn life. And that's why I say, even though we are speaking about this, sometimes it might be part of your story to go through this. As
Yeah.
unfortunate as it is, that might be you having to need to live life in order for you to learn these lessons yourself. But as Mimi is saying, that honestly and truthfully, it is true. Sometimes before we get the spiritual, we actually need to assess the mental and the emotional, because how are you to understand what the signals are even trying to communicate with you if you can't understand those processes? And I think one of the ways that I've had to start training myself, retraining myself, in regards to listening to my spirit, is that if I try and do a food shop, or I try and go to a shop and pick out things intuitively. I might hold a particular fruit, but if my spirit and my hand is drawing me to that particular fruit, that's what I'm going to pick up. And I think it's those small things that you start to do in your daily life that actually help you to rely on listening to your spirit and what is coming up for you as a message. If you're curious and you might not know where to start in that journey, but as Mimi has said, like, perhaps you need to see somebody who, is holistic in their approach. They understand that you are a spiritual person, you embody spiritual principles, and if you are informing your therapy sessions around that, that person can hold space for those beliefs and practices. But maybe getting the spiritual service or like a full cleansing isn't exactly what you need at the precise moment in time. Yeah. So that was really interesting. And I feel that, initially when I was framing this topic of discussion, I was just like, which way, what direction is it going to go? But I really have loved how informative this has been. And as you know, we always end our sessions with a hot seat question. Now, Mimi, I would love to reflect on your experience as a Black woman who has been in predominantly white spaces within the spiritual and healing community. The laugh is telling me everything I need to know, be it online or in person. And what advice would you give to someone who may also be going through the feelings, the thoughts, and the emotions that you went through and not know where to start with safeguarding their interactions in these spaces, aka trusting their energetics as a language in these spaces as a Black woman?
Emily caught me off guard. Like, I just have to reference why I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at the question, but I didn't clap eyes on the question. So this is completely spun me. Okay. So do you mean from my professional experience as a Black woman navigating these spaces?
Yeah.
I feel like I could write a whole book about this. I don't know if I'm going to answer the question, but one of the things that really stood out within my experience, and I'll take it from the professional lens before I go into the consumer lens, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I have had so many moments of where are we? I don't see us. If me as a Black woman, I'm looking for other Black people in this space. I just couldn't see anyone who looked or represented or felt like me within the UK space specifically. You look across the pond, abundance of people who look different from what is perceived as spiritual. But I couldn't find that. When it came to then kind of me entering into this space and really expressing my views as a spiritual practitioner, I noticed that for a lot of what I was speaking about, a lot of it stems from culture and heritage and ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And that by and large did put me in another field, in a completely separate spiritual field. But then that also left me feeling quite isolated and quite alone and then quite exposed, even though I knew that I was speaking from my own framework and I knew and I trusted that. I also had moments where it was like, well, that's not what the masses are looking for. I then don't fit within that perfect mold, and I was okay with that. but it also then made me question about the types of interactions or the types of people who would then find me or not find me, to be honest. Maybe that's more the relevant one. But then as I kind of progressed, again, I'm just digital space alone.
Mm-hmm.
I also then found that I was getting a lot of this love bombing kind of technique happening, but it would also come with a, where did you learn about this? How do you like, where do I start? How do I develop this? Almost like a, give me your labor for free, but also I'm questioning your validity. Very colonial perspective to ask someone about where they learned whatever they're talking about, specifically if they're talking from a cultural or an ancestral perspective. That's a
Mm-hmm.
very colonial mindset to put on somebody else, because that ain't it. I ain't talking about textbook. I'm talking about the opposite. I'm talking about oration,
Yeah.
understanding things from your spirit. So that was quite discouraging. I remember feeling like, what the fuck, man? Like, I'm not going to give you textbook. Like, go to a library if that's what you want.
Yeah.
But again, I had to really sit with, I'm not going to change my perspective, my tune, my ethos, my values. So I took myself out of that space. Like, in all honesty, like I took myself out of that space. But what I have been blessed with is the more in-person interactions and the difference of not experiencing love bombing, not experiencing energy siphoning through being in person, and actually having the privilege of serving people of all backgrounds, all nationalities, all ethnicities, all different walks of life, all different ages, and just getting to share and understand the energy that's within the room. And that's bit for me, that's a true privilege. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's been my experience.
I think you have answered the question, sorry. And, you know, I love how that you have spoken about the fact that for people who are not the perception of what spirituality looks like in the West, a lot of our stories, insights, the wisdom that you gain come from oration, dreams. It's not in a textbook. You don't have to have a qualification. It's something that's passed down within your bloodline. So, rightfully so, we're not here to, I want to say, feed the colonial mindset that everything has to be done via education, formative education. That's very important. And I also would love to like shine a light on the very fact that, you know, there's that transition where, okay, cool. Yes, you felt isolated in those spaces. Your framework was completely different, but now you're in a space where you're able to service people in person from different races, backgrounds, faiths, and also belief systems. And it also, you know, not that this formed the question, but I would love to know, how does it actually feel to be in a space where those beauties are recognized?
It's, oh gosh, like it feels like a homecoming. Like it feels really grounding and anchoring, because I can have these sorts of conversations and be very blunt and honest in saying, this is my cultural framework. You need to give yourself permission to go and explore your own cultural framework. And the fact that people are open to even hearing that without feeling like pushback or like, oh, what's
Mhm.
this black woman telling me, is really affirming. And it's nice when I see people trust themselves enough to go on their own journey and not try to copy and paste my journey or copy and paste someone that they see online. And that for me is like the most beautiful thing that you can do for someone.
And I really love how you've mentioned that it's about your personal journey. At the start of this, in the intro, I said the reason why we're having this conversation is to empower you to take back control over your own journey. And I think, you know, the journey is never straightforward or smooth, but I find that there's almost this falling in love process that happens when you have control again, when you are not relying or dependent on another person's guidance as to how that journey should unfold for you. And yes, we can't control particular parts of the journey, but it almost makes you fall in love. I want to say, disclaimer, be it in hindsight, once you're done with the experience, or even when you're in the experience, like learning those things on your own, discovering what works for you and not copying and pasting is very important. because we are definitely not all the same. We could be from the same cultural background. Me and Mimi share similar cultural backgrounds, but we have different ways of doing things. And I think
Yeah.
that's the beauty. It's not just a standard textbook size. Like, we didn't go to one school and they taught us all these things. There are differences, even if you do come from the same cultural background. So that's something very important to know. And I really love that you shared that with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask you one question?
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
I guess like I would love just for you to speak to anyone who's listening and just to give them advice on if they're currently experiencing this love bombing or have experienced this love bombing, like what words of wisdom would you give to them or share to them?
The first thing that came to my spirit was just, I know it's going to be hard not to do so, but please don't feel guilty or blame yourself for being in those circumstances. I think it's very easy. And I think I also did this. The blame and the weight of the blame can almost take away from the very fact that you were an innocent bystander in this. So I think the first thing I would love to say is that if you are journeying through this, or if you have experienced this, the first thing that I would love for you to do is remove shame from the equation and actually give yourself permission to
Mhm.
understand and know that you were just seeking and fostering genuine connection. I think, secondly, it's important to know that we are all here to learn from our experiences, albeit how painful they can be at times. And I think that's quite, as I'm speaking, I feel quite Jupiterian as I say this, but I think it's oftentimes through these experiences do we learn in hindsight. And as you see me and Mimi here today, we didn't just learn from the fact that we woke up one day out of bed and this insight came to us. It's through having discourse with people. And I always say this, that you might not need to speak to tens of thousands of people, but having that one trusted person, having that one trusted advisor, having that person that you can actually openly share your experiences with really helps to actually reframe things in your mind. And it takes away, you know how I said not blaming yourself for being in those circumstances? You start to realize that, you know what? Yes, you might take accountability for not being able to trust the energetics of your own system, how the messages were trying to signal to you and show you that, oh, danger here. But you realize that, you know, this was actually a strategy. This was something that you didn't know because you came in from a space of being genuine and seeking genuine connection. And please don't close your heart to connections in the digital space and the spiritual space. They're very much, still very much, very genuine and real people that exist in these spaces who you can develop strong bonds and connections with. There are still a handful. And I think listening to your spirit, not closing yourself up from interactions. If you feel a pull to a particular person, like Mimi said, yes, there could be, you know, I want to say devices at play behind the scene, but there could also just generally be a genuine friendship that is fostering out. Then I think about myself with Mimi. I hadn't seen her before, we had never interacted. Had I hesitated and said, oh no, she might find that weird, we wouldn't be here today in that space. And that's what I'm saying, that there are people who you can form as part of your community, part of your tribe, part of your friends. And I think it's important that in as much as we're trying to prevent, you know, exploitation, manipulation, and we're trying to enforce safety here, there's also beauty in exploring and venturing outside the comfort zone. And that was my comfort zone. Like, I was like, oh, that could be a bit weird, but I just followed the impulse. I followed. So I think not shutting yourself off to genuine connections that you could potentially foster in these spaces. So I don't know if I have answered what you've asked. Hopefully I have. But
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you for asking me that. Didn't expect that, but I know you didn't expect yours too, so I guess we make it for it. So I would love to thank everyone for listening to today's discussion. Due to the nature of what was discussed in this episode, as we mentioned earlier on, there might be some parts that might be triggering for some. And, you know, whilst we are here to shine a light on some of the issues that are very real and relevant in the UK based space, and we would love to leave you with some contact details if you have been impacted by today's discussion. So, the first organisation, and these are all UK based organisations, is www.actiononspiritualabuse.org.uk. The second organisation is Safe Spaces England and Wales.org.uk, and Victim Support unethical.org.uk. And the first two tend to specialize with spiritual abuses that have occurred in organizations, not just the church alone, but in spiritual spaces across the board. And if you have been a victim of cybercrime, there is www.actionfraud.police.uk. And I think that's important that, if you have had funds taken, and if you've been under deception, it's important for you to stand up and actually bring this forth to the relevant authorities. And we have also listed additional resources in the episode description below. So please check that out if you need further support. As always, we will love to hear from you. And, feel free to email us. Our inbox is open and we would love to hear from you. And our email address is twomutablesInAPod@gmail.com. You can also keep an eye out for a written reflection piece inspired by today's episode by simply searching Two Mutables in a Pod on Substack in the search bar. Until next time, thank you and bye for now.